I only wish he had been president of the United States. George Will's a conservative, said he's the man who would make the best president. The Nunn Center, with which Susan is associated, is in his honor, and that's where Sam has his office. I'll be seeing him this coming week. So, Susan, I welcome you to talk about rude democracy, civility and incivility in American politics. And let me just say, our definition of civility is not that people give up their sacred beliefs that may be different. It means respect. It means listening. It means dialogue, not watering down, dialogue, and you just might get on higher ground like the Founding Fathers did. Susan, we give you a hearty welcome.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Austin, where are you? One of my students is here. No? What's that?
We're here yesterday.
Maybe you had to leave early. There will be points off for that. Well, many thanks for having me here. I'm very grateful. Look forward most of all to hearing your questions and your ideas. I looked at where you all were from on the back of the program, and from some great institutions. You and your fellow students, you're going to be the next generation of leaders, as was mentioned. So we need you to step it up and do a lot better than what we're seeing now in Congress and on television. I have long been interested in the more sticky concepts in American process of democracy, and it makes my work, my scholarly work, very difficult and kind of aggravating, but it's fun. One of the concepts that I've wrestled with my whole career is public opinion. Very hard to define, very slippery, but again, very meaningful for American democracy. And now I'm studying civility, and I put it in that same category. It's absolutely crucial to the future of American democracy and our practice, but it's aggravating, it's hard to define, and in any case, even though it's hard to define, we won't let go of it either. You know, some concepts, some ideas, we can't really get our hands around, so we just dismiss them. And civility sticks with us in this chronic way that we have to confront, because it is so central to our political lives as citizens, as participants, as leaders. Beyond democratic theory and practice and political science, which is what I do, the real reason I wrote the book, Rude Democracy, was because of my students and my experience with students, not just at Georgia Tech, where I teach right now, but also my students at previous institutions like Northwestern, where I taught for about 14 years. I was talking with one of our state assemblymen, somebody in the legislature who's very supportive of the university system a few years ago, and he worried that there were liberal professors, professors on the left, that might be crushing the free speech of undergraduates and preventing the campus from being the kind of open, democratic place of dialogue that it's supposed to be. And, you know, I take this very seriously from one of our funding partners, our stakeholders. I don't think it's a problematic question. I think it's exactly the kind of question that a state assemblyman should ask of somebody like me who works for the university system. So I said, well, it's an empirical question, isn't it? It's something to be studied. So he and I undertook for 2 years in a row now a survey of a couple of thousand students across the state of Georgia, all kinds of institutions, from very small 2-year transfer places to big universities like University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. And our goal was to make sure that there wasn't this curbing of free speech on campus, and that students felt really comfortable expressing their views in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So did a very good study. The UGA survey lab collected all the data very scientifically, as you can do a survey. But what we found was very surprising, to me at least. The faculty were not an issue. I mean, there were definitely complaints about some faculty, which were noted, because there was a lot of space for students to write in comments about their classes on campus. But on the whole, no unusual complaints about faculty that we don't hear elsewhere. However, and what was surprising to me was that many, many students expressed a profound discomfort in talking about politics, talking about religion, talking about any important social issue with each other. They were worried about getting in a fight, about being passionate where that's not welcome. They were concerned about saying something offensive to somebody around them, or just about getting upset themselves. So that was definitely the most important takeaway for the survey, was that students do not feel good about political argument. In fact, they'd like to avoid it at all costs because it can lead to instability, to disruption, and to unhappiness, and to making campus life feel unbalanced or worrisome or even frightening. I found this to be extremely troubling, but it rang true to me, having been on campuses all of my life. And so I wondered. I thought, well, was I any good at making an argument back when I was in college? Besides to my parents. Did I seek out people who didn't agree with me? Did I ever change my mind about my politics, my ideology? In taking it to a much grander level, which is what I try to do in my work now, does America know how to argue in a civil, productive, and even comfortable fashion? I think the answer is a resounding no. Hence our current political discourse, which is mostly very flip and hysterical and annoying, and really does feel a little bit dangerous at times. So what we're finding on the campus is really just a microcosm of what you see, I think, on cable television and on the internet. There is, of course, incivility all around us in daily life, and in my work, I'm not talking about lack of manners or general social rudeness, like when somebody, you have your eye on a certain parking space and someone scoots right in there, or gives you the finger in traffic, which, I don't know, I get that a lot, and my kids think that, it's a reason for it, but I think it's some kind of rise of incivility on the road. These are very important things, but they're more in the category of social manners. They're vital, but they're less interesting to me than political civility and discourse. How we talk about politics, how we tolerate each other's beliefs, and whether it goes anywhere productive with regard to public policy and our lives in America. So let me talk about three aspects of political civility today. First, and pretty briefly, it's a huge topic, but let's get some historical context about civility in American history. Where have we been before we supposedly hit rock bottom here in 2010? Where have we been as a nation? Second, I want to talk about the balance between incivility and civility. Maybe some incivility is a little bit helpful. It's hard to think about this. This is one of the most difficult parts of my book, and it's hard to think about in general on the part of audiences. But maybe we all just need a tougher skin, and incivility will always be with us to a certain extent in a democracy. And third, last, let me talk about how we can boost civility. And a lot of this is going to be up to you as our future leaders, and also our educators, people who try to make citizens, whether that's in K-12 school or at the university. We can have powerful effects through education on civility, on changing the essential nature of citizenship, but it means we have to commit to it. And I don't just mean resources, I mean time and the will to change the kind of political discourse around us. Because if we don't, we will continue to have what you see in political discourse, and I don't know if it's that productive for where we need to go as a society. History, my first topic. So it looks like a lot of incivility around us. Again, people think we are on this linear decline, that we've really hit bottom. Historians have tried to remind us repeatedly over the years, without much success, that incivility really has been a constant in American life. We always fought with each other. In the 18th century, in the days of our founding, incivility was a constant. We glory in a lot of it because some of the incivility was directed toward the British Crown and its abuses to establish a free nation. The original Tea Party, for example. Some might have called that a incident in incivility. But we often forget the duels, the ugly language, the mudslinging that was directed not toward England, but toward each other. Take our founding fathers. They were not always models of dignity and civility. As David McCullough writes in his biography of John Adams, which is just a wonderful book, he writes, Alexander Hamilton berated John Adams in nearly every possible way for his great intrinsic defects of character, his disgusting egoism, weakness, vacillation, his eccentric tendencies. Though Hamilton did not go so far as to call Adams insane, he cited his ungovernable temper as evidence of a man out of control. And this wasn't even close to how ugly it got. I'm just giving you, some of the lighter stuff. So the founding fathers, not exactly models of civility as we'd like to think of it. Not that they didn't make contributions that are important, that are here with us today, but incivility was definitely a thread that ran through their behavior and their discourse. The 19th century didn't see much of an improvement, far from it. Americans argued in ways that demeaned themselves and each other. Very often, as Alexis de Tocqueville, the open-minded visitor from France, who a lot of you have read, noted, we silenced each other in local communities through speech and intimidation. In fact, while he fell in love with a lot of America in the 19th century as he traveled around up and down the East Coast and into the Midwest, he was very conscious of our flaws, and in particular, our willingness to crush minority opinion with whatever we had. And it was Tocqueville in the 1830s when he was writing who coined the phrase you probably heard, tyranny of the majority. That's from the 1830s, not from recent times. This is a terrific dialogue that Tocqueville reports on in Democracy in America, so that's his big work that compiles all of his observations from his travels. This is published in the decades before the Civil War. So this is a dialogue that Tocqueville is reporting from his travels. I said one day to an inhabitant of Pennsylvania, be so good as to explain to me how it happens that in a state founded by Quakers and celebrated for its toleration, freed blacks are not allowed to exercise civil rights. They pay the taxes. Is it not fair that they should have a vote? You insult us, replied my informant. If you imagine that our legislators could have committed so gross an act of injustice and intolerance, what? Then blacks possess, so Tocqueville says, what? Then blacks possess the right of voting in this country? And his informant says, without the smallest doubt. And Tocqueville says, well, how comes it then that at the polling booth this morning, I did not perceive a single Negro in the entire meeting? And so his respondent says, this is not the fault of the law. The Negroes have an undisputed right of voting, but they voluntarily abstain from making their appearance. And Tocqueville says, a very pretty piece of modesty on their parts, rejoined I. Tocqueville then writes, it says that he gives his informant the last word, says, why, the truth is that they are not disinclined to vote, but they are afraid of being maltreated. In this country, the law is sometimes unable to maintain its authority without the support of the majority. But in this case, the majority entertains a very strong prejudice against the blacks, and the magistrates are unable to protect them in their exercise of legal privileges. And Tocqueville says, what? Then the majority claims the right not only of making the laws, but breaking the laws it's made? He concludes, I do not say that tyrannical forces, abuses frequently occur in the United States, in America in the present day, but I maintain that no sure barrier is established against them, and that the causes which mitigate the government are to be found in the circumstances and the manners of the country more than its laws. So, put another way, the enforcement of any law relies on the circumstances of our political culture, our integrity, and our civility. So, I think it's a great example from Tocqueville's day, so long ago, that it doesn't really matter what the law says if you're not building the kind of political culture that can support the law. Tocqueville analyzed our inequalities. He was very interested in slavery and the treatment of Native Americans. And also He could not see, though, I mean, he saw this tyranny of the majority, he saw a lot of incivility in his travels, but he couldn't see how bad it would get in the 1850s, which is, if I had to pick the worst decade in American history for civility, it would absolutely be the 1850s. A very brutal period in American life, in American social life, political life, intellectual life, as we approached a truly horrendous war that would change the nation forever and divide us. The 1850s kind of incivility makes the cable news of today and even the most hateful blogs on the internet look like child's play. One of the most famous images of that era is the one here, like Jon Stewart. See the book? The famous images of that era is